The massive throne room stretched for hundreds of meters beneath crystal domes that showed the stars beyond. Emperor Kyung-ho sat on his golden seat and looked out at 17 different star systems that belonged to him. Each system had billions of people who followed his orders without question. His empire had ruled the galaxy for 300 years, but today something felt different. The emperor touched a control panel beside his throne. Lights began to glow in the walls around him. Behind thick glass panels, he could see the shapes of his most powerful weapons. The war dragons lay sleeping in their special chambers. Each dragon was as big as a battleship and more deadly than any army. The dragons had smooth metal skin that looked almost alive. Their long necks curved gracefully even in sleep. Wings that could carry them between planets were folded against their sides. Along their backs, crystal spines glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. These were not just machines. They were living creatures mixed with the best technology in the galaxy. Kyung-ho remembered the stories his grandfather told him. The dragons had won the Great Unification Wars. They had brought peace to the galaxy by defeating every enemy of the Empire, but that was long ago. For 3 centuries, the dragons had slept peacefully in their chambers. No one had been brave enough or strong enough to challenge the Empire when they knew about the dragons. The Emperor stood up from his throne and walked closer to the glass. His reflection showed in the smooth surface. He was getting older. Gray streaks ran through his black hair. Lines appeared around his eyes. But the dragons never aged. They would sleep forever if needed, waiting for his command to wake up and fight. Far away from the imperial capital, on a small mining planet called Kepler 442b, a man named Dae-hyun was having a very different kind of day. He wore simple work clothes and carried a tool bag as he walked through the mining tunnels. The tunnels were carved deep into the rocky planet where machines dug up valuable metals for the Empire. Dae-hyun was good with machines. He could fix almost anything that broke down in the mines. The other workers respected him because he always solved problems quickly and safely. But Dae-hyun often wondered if there was more to life than just fixing broken equipment on a distant planet. The mining planet was not beautiful, like the worlds closer to the imperial capital. The sky was always gray because of the dust from the mining operations. The buildings were simple and practical. Most of the people who lived there were workers like Dae-hyun, who had come from other worlds to make money in the mines. But Dae-hyun was not alone on this dusty planet. His partner So-young worked as a botanist for the mining company. Her job was to study plants and find ways to grow food in the harsh conditions of the mining world. She was always curious about everything she found, where other people saw only rocks and dirt. So-young found interesting things to study. Today, So-young was exploring a new section of the mining tunnels. The company had dug deeper than ever before and found some unusual rock formations. So-young had asked for permission to study them before the miners blasted them away to reach the metals. Underneath, she held a small light as she walked through the narrow tunnel. Her equipment bag bounced against her hip with each step. The rock walls around her were different from the usual stone found in the mines. These rocks had strange patterns that looked almost like they were made by living things instead of natural forces. So-young stopped walking when her light showed something incredible ahead of her. The tunnel opened into a large cave that sparkled, with thousands of crystal formations. But these were not ordinary crystals. They glowed with their own inner light. Blues and greens and purples pulsed through the crystal structures, like blood flowing through veins. She moved closer to get a better look. The crystals were arranged in complex patterns that reminded her of plant root systems or maybe nerve networks in living animals. Each crystal connected to others with thin threads of light that flickered and danced. The whole cave seemed to be alive with some kind of energy. So Young took out her scanner and pointed it at the nearest crystal formation. The readings made no sense. The scanner showed biological activity but also detected metals and energy patterns that should not exist in nature. She had studied plants and rocks for many years, but had never seen anything like this. As she moved her scanner closer to one of the larger crystals, something unexpected happened. The crystal began to pulse faster. The light inside it grew brighter. Other crystals nearby began to respond as well. Soon the entire cave was filled with waves of colored light that seemed to flow from crystal to crystal. So Young stepped back in surprise. She had not touched anything or changed any settings on her scanner, but somehow her presence had caused the crystals to react. She watched in amazement as patterns of light spread throughout the cave like signals being sent from one crystal to another. Meanwhile, in his palace far across the galaxy, Emperor Kyung-ho felt something he had not experienced in many years. A small vibration ran through the floor beneath his feet. He looked around the throne room, but everything appeared normal. The guards at the doors had not moved. The light still glowed steadily, but something had changed. In the dragon chambers, the blue lights along the creature's spines flickered just once. It was so brief that the monitoring computers did not even record it. But after 300 years of perfect stillness, the dragons had felt something. Deep in their sleeping minds, an old memory stirred. So Young carefully took images of the crystal formations with her camera. She collected small samples that had broken off naturally from the main structures. She made detailed notes about everything she observed, but she could not shake the feeling that she had discovered something much more important than just unusual rock formations. As she prepared to leave the cave, So Young noticed that the crystals had become quiet again. The dancing lights had faded back to their original soft glow, but she was sure that something had changed. The crystals seemed to be waiting for something or someone. Neither So Young nor Emperor Kyung-ho knew that their lives would soon become connected in ways that would change the entire galaxy forever. 3 weeks after So Young discovered the crystal cave, rebellion exploded across the outer rim of the galaxy. The trouble started on 3 different worlds at the same time. Mining stations went silent. Trade ships disappeared. Imperial governors sent desperate messages, asking for help before their communications cut off completely. The rebel leader was a man named Taemin, who had once served as an imperial officer. He knew how the Empire's military worked because he had been part of it for 20 years. But something had made him angry enough to turn against everything he once protected. Now he commanded stolen imperial ships and weapons that he used to attack the very empire he once served. Emperor Kyung-ho stood in his war room surrounded by holographic displays that showed the rebel attacks. Red warning lights flashed across star maps as his admirals reported more bad news. The rebels were not fighting like a normal army. They attacked quickly and then disappeared before imperial forces could respond. They knew exactly where to hit to cause the most damage. "Your Imperial Majesty," said Admiral Haijin as she bowed before the Emperor. She was his most trusted military commander and had never lost a battle in 15 years of service. "Our fleets are having trouble catching the rebels. They use hit-and-run tactics that make it hard to bring our superior firepower to bear against them." The Emperor nodded grimly. "How many systems have we lost contact with?" 7 systems are now under complete rebel control. Another 5 are partially occupied. The rebels seem to know our patrol schedules and supply routes better than we do ourselves." Kyung-ho walked to the large window that looked out over his capital city. Millions of lights sparkled in the darkness below. Flying vehicles moved between tall buildings like glowing insects. This was the heart of his empire, but even here he could feel the uncertainty that came with the rebellion. "Perhaps it is time," the Emperor said quietly. "Prepare the awakening protocol for the war dragons." Admiral Haijin tried to hide her surprise but failed. In all her years of service, the dragons had never been awakened. They were the ultimate weapon that everyone knew about, but no one had ever seen in action. The very threat of their existence had kept peace in the galaxy for 3 centuries. "Are you sure, Your Majesty? The dragons have slept for so long. The ancient protocols may not work as expected, I am sure. Gather the dragon keepers and the imperial scientists. We will wake the sleeping giants and end this rebellion quickly." On the mining planet Kepler 442b, So Young spent every free moment studying the crystals she had discovered. She had set up a small laboratory in her quarters where she could examine the samples, without interference from her regular work duties. The crystals continued to fascinate her because they seemed to respond to different stimuli in ways that normal rocks should not. Daehyun often visited her laboratory in the evenings after his work in the mines was finished. He enjoyed watching So Young work because her enthusiasm for discovery reminded him that there were still mysteries in the galaxy worth exploring. Tonight she was particularly excited about something new she had found. "Look at this, So Young," said as she showed Daehyun a piece of crystal under her microscope. "The internal structure is incredibly complex. These formations have layers within layers, almost like they were grown rather than formed by geological processes." Daehyun looked through the microscope and saw intricate patterns that looked more like circuit boards than natural rock formations. "It does look artificial, but who could have made something like this? And why bury it so deep underground?" "That's what I've been wondering, but there's something else that's even more interesting." So Young switched to a different sample and adjusted the microscope settings. "When I expose these crystals to certain electromagnetic frequencies, they respond by generating their own energy patterns." She demonstrated by connecting a small device to the crystal sample. As soon as she activated the device, the crystal began to glow brighter. More importantly, other crystal samples around the laboratory started to glow as well, even though they were not connected to anything. "They're communicating with each other," Daehyun said with amazement. "It's like they're part of some kind of network." "Exactly. And the network extends much further than just these samples. I've been monitoring the cave where I found them, and the entire formation responds when I activate crystals here in the laboratory." Far away in the Imperial Palace, the Dragon Awakening ceremony was beginning. The Emperor and his advisors gathered in the dragon chambers deep beneath the throne room. Ancient machines hummed to life for the first time in centuries. Lights that had been dark for generations began to glow with renewed power. The dragon keepers were old men who had learned their duties from their fathers and grandfathers. They had maintained the sleeping dragons for decades without ever expecting to see them wake. Now they moved between control panels with nervous excitement, following procedures that had been written down long ago. "Beginning bio-neural interface activation," announced the chief dragon keeper. His hands shook slightly as he pressed a series of buttons on the main control console, initiating connection between Imperial consciousness and dragon neural networks. The machines around the sleeping dragons began to work harder. Lights flickered along the creatures' spines as the awakening systems tried to establish contact with their minds. For several minutes, the process seemed to be working normally. The dragons' bodies showed signs of increased activity as ancient systems came back online. But then something went wrong. The bio-neural readings that should have shown a connection between the Emperor and the dragons remained flat. The creatures' vital signs were strong, but they did not respond to the Imperial commands being transmitted through the awakening systems. "Try increasing the signal strength," ordered Emperor Chung-ho. His voice remained calm, but his advisors could see the concern in his eyes. The dragon keepers adjusted their controls and tried again. The machines worked even harder, filling the chamber with humming sounds and flashing lights. But still the dragons did not wake. Their bodies remained as still as they had been for 300 years. Back on Kepler 442b, So Young was conducting another experiment with her crystal samples when something unexpected happened. As she activated her testing device, all the crystals in her laboratory suddenly blazed with intense light. The glow was so bright that she had to shield her eyes, but more importantly, she felt something she had never experienced before. For just a moment, it seemed like something vast and ancient was trying to communicate with her. The sensation lasted only a few seconds before the crystals returned to their normal gentle glow. "Did you feel that?" she asked Daehyun, who was staring at the crystals with wide eyes. "I felt something. Like there was another mind trying to reach out to us." Neither of them knew that at that exact moment, far across the galaxy, the war dragons had stirred for the first time in 3 centuries. Deep in their sleeping minds, something had heard So Young's signal and responded. The dragons were still, not awake, but they were no longer completely asleep either. In the Imperial Palace, the Dragon Keepers reported their failure to Emperor Kyungho. For the first time in the Empire's history, the dragons had refused to wake for their master. The morning after the failed dragon awakening ceremony, Emperor Kyungho received the worst news of his reign. Rebel leader Taemin had captured the entire Karathi system with its 12 inhabited planets. Over 50 billion people now lived under rebel control. The Imperial Navy had lost 6 major battleships trying to retake just one of the outer planets, but something even more disturbing had happened during the night. Deep in the dragon chambers, monitoring equipment detected something that should have been impossible. The war dragons had moved. For the first time in 3 centuries, the massive creatures had shifted their positions slightly. Their bio-neural activity had increased. Most shocking of all, they seemed to be responding to signals that were not coming from the Imperial Palace. "Find the source of these signals," Emperor Kyungho commanded his chief scientist. "Something is calling to my dragons, and I want to know what it is." The scientist bowed nervously. "Your Majesty, our long-range sensors have detected unusual energy patterns from several systems in the outer rim. The signals appear to be bio-neural in nature, but they are not using any known Imperial frequencies. Could the rebels have found a way to control the dragons?" "We do not believe so, Your Majesty. The signals seem to be natural rather than artificial. But we cannot explain how natural bio-neural signals could affect the dragons when our own technology cannot." The Emperor stood at the great window of his throne room and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, something was calling to his most powerful weapons. Something that could do what 300 years of Imperial science could not do. The thought both frightened and intrigued him. Send Admiral Hyjin to investigate these signal sources personally. Give her a fast ship and full authority to discover what is happening in the outer systems. On Kepler 442b, So Young was having the most exciting week of her scientific career. Every day brought new discoveries about the crystal formations she had found. The crystals were definitely alive in some way, though not like any life form she had ever studied. They seemed to store and process information like a vast biological computer network. More importantly, the crystals appeared to be trying harder to communicate with her. Each time she conducted experiments, the responses grew stronger and more complex. Today she had discovered that the crystals could create detailed 3-dimensional images in their internal light patterns. The images showed things she did not recognize, but that looked like they might be memories of some kind. "Daehyun, you need to see this," So Young called as her partner entered the laboratory after his shift in the mines. "I think the crystals are showing me pictures of the past." She activated her equipment and the crystals responded immediately. This time the light patterns formed clear images that seemed to hang in the air above the crystal formations. The images showed massive creatures with long necks and powerful wings. They flew through space between planets and stars without any need for ships or protective suits. "Those look like dragons," Daehyun said with wonder. "But they're huge. Each one must be as big as a battleship." "That's what I thought too, but look at this next sequence." The crystal images changed to show the same dragon-like creatures in what appeared to be a great battle. They fought against fleets of ships that used weapons So Young did not recognize. The dragons moved with incredible speed and grace, dodging weapon fire and striking back with beams of energy that came from their own bodies. "It's like watching a historical record," So Young said. "But these events must have happened a very long time ago. The technology in the images is completely different from anything we use today." The crystal display continued, showing the dragons after the battle. But now they looked different. Their natural grace was gone. They moved stiffly as if they were being controlled by something else. The light in their eyes had changed from bright intelligence to dull obedience. "Something happened to them," Daehyun observed. "They look like they've been enslaved somehow." The final images showed the dragons being placed in large chambers that looked remarkably similar to the dragon vaults So Young had heard about in stories of the Imperial Palace. The creatures were connected to complex machines that seemed to suppress their natural consciousness while keeping their bodies alive. As the crystal display faded, So Young felt that strange sensation again. It seemed like something was trying to speak directly to her mind. This time the contact lasted longer, and she could almost understand what it was trying to say. The message seemed to be a mixture of sadness, hope, and urgent need. "They're calling for help," she whispered. "I think the dragons are still alive somewhere, and they're asking someone to free them." 3 days later, Admiral Hyjin arrived at Kepler 442b with a small but fast exploration ship. She had been tracking the mysterious bioneural signals across several star systems, and her instruments indicated that this mining planet was one of the strongest source points. She did not expect to find anything more interesting than unusual rock formations, but her duty required a thorough investigation. The Admiral was a practical woman who had earned her rank through skill and dedication rather than political connections. She had no patience for mysteries or scientific theories. She wanted facts that could help the Empire deal with its current crisis. The rebellion was growing stronger every day while the dragons remained stubbornly asleep. Her investigation team located the source of the signals within hours of landing. The mining company records showed that a botanist named So Young had discovered unusual crystal formations in the deep tunnels. When Admiral Hyjin reviewed So Young's research reports, she realized this might be more important than anyone had imagined. "Bring this botanist and her partner to me immediately," she ordered her security team. "But treat them as valuable resources, not prisoners. If they have found something that can wake the dragons, they may be the key to saving the Empire." So Young and Daehyun were surprised when Imperial soldiers appeared at their quarters that evening. But Admiral Hyjin explained the situation with military directness that made it clear this was not a request. "The Empire needs your help," she told them. "Your crystal research may be connected to something much larger than you realize. I need you to come with me to the Imperial capital and demonstrate your findings to the Emperor himself." So Young looked at her partner with excitement and fear. They had always known their discovery was important, but they had never imagined it might be connected to the legendary war dragons. Now they were being asked to help save the Empire itself. "What about our work here?" Daehyun asked. "Your real work is just beginning," Admiral Hyjin replied. "Pack everything you need for an extended journey. We leave for the capital tomorrow morning." That night, as So Young prepared for the journey that would change her life forever, the crystals in her laboratory glowed more brightly than ever before. Deep in their network, something ancient and powerful felt a surge of hope for the first time in centuries. Help was finally coming. The journey to the Imperial capital took 5 days through hyperspace. So Young and Daehyun had never traveled so far from their home planet before. They spent most of the trip in Admiral Hyjin's private cabin discussing what they had learned about the crystals and what it might mean for the Empire's dragon problem. Admiral Hyjin was impressed by So Young's scientific knowledge and Daehyun's practical engineering skills. She began to understand why the dragons might respond to these humans when they ignored the Emperor's commands. There was something different about the way humans approached problems compared to other species in the galaxy. The Imperial scientists have been trying to control the dragons using the same methods for 300 years, Admiral Hyjin explained. "But you discovered something new within weeks of finding those crystals. Perhaps the dragons need a different kind of connection." When they arrived at the Imperial capital, So Young and Daehyun were amazed by the size and beauty of the planet-sized city. Billions of lights sparkled across the surface like stars brought down to Earth. Flying vehicles moved between towers that reached up into the clouds. The Imperial Palace itself was larger than most cities on their homeworld. Emperor Kyungho received them in his private study rather than the formal throne room. He wanted to understand what they had discovered without the ceremony and protocol that usually surrounded imperial meetings. The emperor was younger than they had expected, and his eyes showed both intelligence and desperation. "Show me what you have found," the emperor said without wasting time on formal greetings. So Young had brought several crystal samples and her testing equipment. She set up a small demonstration in the emperor's study and activated the crystals. Using the same method she had developed on Kepler 442b, the crystals responded immediately, filling the room with dancing patterns of colored light, but this time the response was much stronger than anything So Young had seen before. The crystals seemed to know they were close to the sleeping dragons. The light patterns became more complex and urgent. Images formed in the air that showed the dragons in their current sleeping state, but also visions of what they could become if freed from their artificial bonds. Emperor Kyung-ho watched the display with growing excitement and concern. "These images show my dragons, but they are different from what I was taught about them. They look like independent creatures rather than weapons." "That's exactly what they are," So Young said with growing confidence. "The crystals have shown me the dragons' history. They were never meant to be weapons. They were guardians who protected the galaxy willingly until something happened to enslave them." The emperor's expression darkened. "Are you saying my ancestors committed some crime against these creatures?" Daehyun stepped forward diplomatically. "We think your ancestors found a way to control the dragons during a time of great danger. They probably believed it was necessary to save the empire. But the dragons have been waiting for someone who could free them from that control." As if responding to their conversation, the crystal pattern suddenly changed to show a direct connection, forming between So Young and something much larger. The young botanist gasped as she felt the full consciousness of the war. Dragons touching her mind for the first time. The contact was overwhelming at first. So Young experienced centuries of memories, emotions, and thoughts from beings whose intelligence was far greater than her own. But gradually she began to understand what the dragons were trying to tell her. "They don't want revenge," she said with wonder. "They're not angry about being enslaved. They just want to be free to choose their own path. And they're willing to help protect the galaxy, but only as partners rather than servants." Emperor Kyung-ho felt his world changing around him. Everything he had been taught about the dragons and his empire's power was being challenged by a young human woman who had found some crystals in a mine. But he could not deny what he was seeing and feeling as the crystal display continued. "What do they want from me?" he asked. The dragon's response came through So Young's connection. "They want you to remove the artificial neural bonds that keep them enslaved. They want to choose whether to help defend the empire based on their own judgment, rather than forced obedience. And they want representatives from all species to have a voice in how the galaxy is governed." The emperor was quiet for several minutes as he considered this unprecedented situation. Outside his study, emergency reports continued to arrive about Taemin's advancing rebel forces. 3 more star systems had fallen to the rebellion while he was meeting with the humans. His conventional fleets were losing the war. "If I agree to free the dragons, will they help us defeat the rebellion?" he asked finally. "They will help bring peace to the galaxy," So Young replied, translating the dragon's thoughts. "But their methods might be different from what you expect. They don't want to simply destroy the rebels. They want to understand why the rebellion started and address the real problems that caused it." Admiral Haijin had been listening carefully to the entire conversation. As a military officer, she understood the strategic implications of what was being discussed. "Your Majesty, if the dragons can end this rebellion and bring stability to the empire, does it matter whether they serve us or work with us as partners?" Daehyun added his own perspective. "Your Majesty, my experience with machines has taught me that systems work better when all the parts function together by choice rather than force. A partnership with the dragons might be stronger than the old system of control." The emperor looked at the crystal display, which now showed images of a possible future. Dragons and humans work together to defend planets from external threats. Different species cooperated to solve problems that no single group could handle alone. The empire continued to exist, but it had evolved into something better. How do we begin this process? Emperor Kyung-ho asked. So Young smiled as she felt the dragon's excitement through their connection. First, you need to give me access to the dragon chambers. The neural bonds that enslave them are probably built into the same systems that keep them alive. Daehyun and I will need to work together to modify those systems safely. And then? Then we wake them up and ask them to help us save the galaxy. As if sensing that momentous changes were about to begin, the crystals in So Young's equipment glowed brighter than ever before. Deep in the dragon vaults beneath the palace, 3 massive creatures began to stir with anticipation. Their long sleep was finally coming to an end. Working in the dragon chambers was like stepping into a living cathedral. The 3 war dragons lay in individual alcoves carved from black stone that sparkled with embedded crystals. Each dragon was over 200 meters long from nose to tail. Their metallic scales shifted color from deep blue to silver as the chamber lights played across their sleeping forms. So Young felt overwhelmed by the size and power of the creatures, but also by the sadness that seemed to surround them. Through her crystal connection, she could sense their dreams. For 3 centuries, they had dreamed of flying free through space, of choosing their own battles, of using their wisdom to guide rather than destroy. Daehyun worked with the Imperial engineers to understand the complex systems that kept the dragons alive while suppressing their consciousness. The technology was incredibly advanced, but it had been designed with the single purpose of control rather than cooperation. Modifying it would require great skill and careful planning. The neural suppression network is built into every part of their life support systems, Daehyun explained to So Young as they studied the technical diagrams. We cannot simply turn it off without risking their lives. We need to gradually reduce the suppression while replacing it with voluntary connection interfaces. So Young nodded as she placed her hands on the crystal formations that grew naturally throughout the dragon chambers. These crystals were much larger and more complex than the ones she had found on Kepler 442b. They formed a network that connected all 3 dragons and extended throughout the palace foundations. The dragons are ready, she said after communing with the crystal network. They understand what we are trying to do, and they want to help with the process. They can guide us in modifying the system safely. The work took 3 days and nights. Emperor Kyung-ho watched anxiously as the 2 humans worked alongside his best engineers to rewire systems that had not been changed in centuries. Reports from the war front grew worse each day. Taemin's rebel fleet was only 2 days away from the capital system, but on the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. The first dragon to wake was the largest of the 3. As the neural suppression systems powered down and the voluntary interfaces came online, the massive creature slowly opened eyes that glowed like blue stars. For the first time in 300 years, a war dragon looked upon the world with its own free will. The dragons awakening sent waves of energy through the crystal network that connected to every corner of the palace. Emperor Kyung-ho felt the creature's consciousness touch his mind, but this time it was a gentle contact between equals rather than the forced connection of master and slave. I am Kunwoo, the dragon spoke directly into the minds of everyone present. Its voice was deep and ancient, filled with wisdom and power. I remember the old days when we flew free among the stars. I remember the choice we made to help protect this galaxy. And I remember the betrayal that bound us to unwilling service. The Emperor stepped forward, unsure how to address a creature he had always thought of as a weapon. I am Kyung-ho, current Emperor of this realm. I apologize for the crimes of my ancestors and ask for your help in defending our people. Your apology is accepted, Kunwoo replied. But understand that we no longer serve any single ruler. We choose to help because we believe in protecting life throughout the galaxy. Our partnership must be based on mutual respect and shared decisions. The second dragon, who called herself Mineseo, awakened more quickly once she felt her companions. Consciousness active in the network. The third dragon, Young Ho-jin, practically bounced with excitement as his systems came online. All 3 creatures began to stretch and move, testing bodies that had been still for centuries. As the dragons Awakened fully, So Young found herself serving as a translator and coordinator between human and dragon consciousness. Her connection to the crystal network allowed her to facilitate conversations that would have been impossible otherwise. "We must address the immediate threat," Minesio said, her thoughts focused on the approaching rebel fleet. "But we will not simply destroy these rebels. We must understand why they fight against the Empire." Daehyun had been monitoring the communication networks and brought disturbing news. The rebels are not just fighting for political reasons. Their intelligence suggests they believe the Empire has been preparing to use the dragons against civilian populations to crush all opposition. Emperor Kyung-ho looked troubled. "That was never my intention, but I can understand how it might appear that way to those who feared the dragon's power." Ho-jin, the youngest dragon, projected images from his memories into the crystal network. The images showed the rebels' perspective of recent events. They had seen Imperial forces struggling against the rebellion and expected the dragons to be unleashed as weapons of mass destruction. Their desperate attacks were driven by the belief that they were fighting for the survival of their families and worlds. "They fight from fear rather than hatred," Kunwu observed. "This is a conflict that can be resolved through understanding rather than violence." So Young had an idea. What if we could communicate directly with the rebel leader? If Taemin understood that the dragons are no longer enslaved weapons, he might be willing to negotiate. Admiral Haijin, who had been coordinating the Empire's military response, looked doubtful. "The rebel fleet will reach the capital system in less than 2 days. They are coming here to fight, not to talk. Then we must show them a different way," Minesio said. "We will meet them in space, but not as enemies. We will demonstrate that the old system of fear and control has ended." The dragons began to prepare for their first flight in 3 centuries. The palace engineers worked frantically to open the massive launch tubes that had been sealed for generations. As the dragons tested their wings and energy systems, the entire capital planet could feel the tremors of their movement. But the most important preparation was happening in the crystal network itself. So Young worked with the dragons to establish communication protocols that would allow them to speak directly to the rebel fleet. Instead of arriving as weapons of war, the dragons would come as ambassadors of a new era. Emperor Kyung-ho made the most difficult decision of his reign. He agreed to accompany the dragons personally, not as their master but as a representative of the imperial government willing to negotiate as an equal with the rebels. "This is completely unprecedented," Admiral Haijin warned. "No emperor has ever put himself at such risk." "Then it is time for a new kind of leadership," Kyung-ho replied. "If we want the galaxy to change, we must be willing to change first." As the 3 dragons launched from the palace and soared into space for the first time in centuries, their joy and freedom created ripples of light throughout the crystal network. On distant worlds, people who had never seen a dragon felt a strange sense of hope and possibility. The rebellion was about to encounter something completely unexpected. Instead of the enslaved weapons they feared, they would meet free beings who offered partnership rather than domination. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance as 2 fleets prepared to meet in space, each expecting a battle but finding instead an opportunity for something entirely new. The meeting between the Imperial forces and Taemin's rebel fleet took place in the empty space between 2 star systems. Both sides had expected a battle that would determine the future of the galaxy. Instead, they witnessed something that no one had imagined possible. The 3 war dragons arrived not as weapons of destruction, but as ambassadors of peace. Kunwu, Minesio, and Ho-jin flew through space with a grace and beauty that took the breath away from everyone who saw them. Their scales reflected starlight like living mirrors, and their movements showed a joy in flight that had been suppressed for 3 centuries. But most importantly, they came with a message that reached directly into the minds of every person in both fleets. Through the crystal network that So Young had helped activate, the dragons spoke to rebels and Imperials alike with words of wisdom and hope. "We are no longer the enslaved weapons you fear," Kunwu's voice echoed in thousands of minds at once. "We have awakened to our true purpose as guardians and guides." We come not to destroy but to build a better future for all species in this galaxy. Taemin stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the dragons through the viewscreen with a mixture of awe and suspicion. He had prepared his forces for a desperate battle against creatures of legend. He had not prepared for this moment of wonder and possibility. This could be a trick, his second-in-command warned. The Emperor might be using some new form of control to make the dragons appear peaceful. But even as the words were spoken, both officers felt the gentle touch of dragon consciousness in their minds. It was nothing like the violent mental invasion they had expected. Instead, it felt like being welcomed by ancient friends who offered understanding without judgment. Emperor Kyungho's voice joined the dragon's communication, transmitted through the crystal network to every ship in both fleets. I am here not as your ruler commanding obedience, but as a representative willing to negotiate for a better future. The time of rule by fear and force is ending. We must build something new together. The response from the rebel fleet was immediate confusion. Some ships prepared to attack, believing this was an elaborate deception. Others hesitated, sensing that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy's balance of power. A few began to lower their weapons as their crews felt the genuine desire for peace radiating from the dragons. Tae-min made the decision that changed everything. Instead of ordering an attack, he requested a direct meeting with the Emperor and the dragons. Within hours, representatives from both sides met aboard. Min SEO's back as she flew slowly through space between the two fleets. The meeting took place in a chamber of living crystal that had grown along the dragon's spine. So Young served as facilitator, using her connection to the crystal network to ensure perfect communication between all parties. Daehyun provided technical expertise as they discussed practical solutions to the galaxy's problems. Why did you rebel against the Empire? Mena Seo asked Taemin directly, her thoughts gentle but probing. The rebel leader's answer came loaded with years of frustration and pain. Because the Empire had become a system that served only the powerful while ordinary people suffered. Entire worlds were strip-mined for resources with no concern for the people who lived there. Species that questioned imperial policies were suppressed or relocated. We fought because we saw no other path to justice. Emperor Kyung-ho listened to these accusations with growing understanding. Through the crystal network, he could feel the emotions behind Taemin's words. He realized that his empire had indeed become something his own ancestors would not have recognized or approved. What if we could change that system? The emperor asked. What if we could create a government that truly served all species and worlds? Hojin, the youngest dragon, projected images into the crystal chamber that showed his vision of the future. Worlds where different species worked together to solve problems. Governments that made decisions based on wisdom and consultation, rather than force and fear. A galaxy where the dragons served as mediators and protectors rather than weapons of control. The negotiations continued for 3 days while both fleets waited in space. So Young and Daehyun found themselves at the center of discussions that would reshape galactic civilization. Their human perspective on cooperation and partnership became a bridge between imperial tradition and rebel idealism. The breakthrough came when they realized that both sides wanted the same things: safety for their people, fair treatment for all species, and an end to the cycle of fear and violence that had dominated the galaxy for centuries. The dragon's wisdom provided a framework for achieving these goals without destroying the beneficial aspects of the existing system. The new government structure they designed together was unlike anything that had existed before. The emperor would remain as head of state, but real power would be shared between representatives of all species and worlds. The dragons would serve as advisors and protectors, but only when asked and only for causes they judged worthy. Most importantly, So Young's crystal network research became the foundation for a new form of galactic communication. Instead of ruling through force and fear, the new government would maintain unity through understanding and shared consciousness. Every world would have access to the crystal network, allowing instant communication and consultation on important decisions. Taemin's transformation from rebel leader to founding member of the new Galactic Council, showed how quickly things could change when people were given hope instead of oppression. His military skills became valuable assets in defending the galaxy from external threats rather than fighting internal conflicts. The formal establishment of the new government took place on the imperial capital, but the ceremony was broadcast through the Crystal Network to every world in the galaxy. Species that had been enemies for generations came together to witness the birth of a new era. So Young found herself appointed as the first director of interspecies communication, responsible for developing and maintaining the Crystal Network that connected all member worlds. Her work ensured that no species would ever again feel isolated or unheard in galactic affairs. Daehyun became chief engineering coordinator, leading teams that developed new technologies based on cooperation between biological and mechanical systems. His innovations helped create sustainable development on mining worlds and other planets that had been damaged by pure resource extraction, but the most important change was in the dragons themselves. Kunwu, Minasio, and Hojin became the galaxy's teachers and protectors, sharing their ancient wisdom while learning new things from the younger species. They established the Dragon Academies, where beings from all worlds could come to study cooperation, wisdom, and the arts of peaceful conflict resolution. The story concluded with the arrival of the first signals from beyond the galaxy's edge. Long-range sensors detected massive objects moving through the void between galaxies, heading toward their stellar neighborhood. The nature of these objects was unknown, but their size and trajectory suggested they might pose a threat to all life in the galaxy. But for the first time in centuries, the galaxy was united and ready to face external challenges together. Dragons flew alongside ships from dozens of species. Human ingenuity worked with imperial technology and rebel determination. The Crystal Network connected billions of minds in shared purpose. Emperor Kyungho stood in his throne room, but he was no longer alone on his throne. Representatives from every member species sat in the council chambers around him. Through the Crystal Network, he could feel the thoughts and hopes of countless beings throughout the galaxy. Outside the palace windows, the three dragons soared through the sky with pure joy. Their long imprisonment finally ended. In laboratories across the galaxy, scientists like So Young worked to unlock new mysteries of life and consciousness. In workshops and factories, engineers like Daehyun created technologies that served life rather than destroying it. The galaxy had awakened from a long sleep of fear and division. Whatever challenges came from beyond the stars, they would face them together as partners rather than as masters and slaves. The dragons were free, humanity had found its place among the stars, and the future stretched ahead full of infinite possibilities.